coming out. My name is Katie O'Donnell, and I'm an event staffer here at Politics and Prose bookstore, where we now host in-person and virtual events, along with partnered and supported events, trips, and classes. For a full list of everything offered, please visit our website at politics-prose.com. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started this evening. Please silence your cell phones so as to not disrupt the event. And while we have lifted the mask mandate here in the store, you are encouraged to continue to wear a mask throughout the event, and we have some at the front of the store for your convenience. When we get to the portion of tonight's part of the conversation for audience questions, we have placed a standing microphone here at the end of the aisle to your right. Please line up at one of these mics to ask your question. That way we can hear your question in the recording of the event, as well as for folks who are in the back of the store. Following the Q&A, we will have a signing up here at this table. So if you have not already purchased a copy of the book, we have many copies up behind the register at the front of the store to your back left. Once the event is complete, we do ask that you fold up your chairs and lean them against something sturdy to help out our staff this evening. So without further ado, it is my immense pleasure to welcome Mehdi Hasan, celebrating the release of Win Every Argument, The Art of Debating, Persuading, and Public Speaking. Win Every Argument shows how anyone can communicate with confidence, rise above the tit for tats on social media, and triumph in a successful and productive debate in the real world. Whether you are making a presentation at work or debating current political issues with a friend, Mehdi Hasan will teach you how to sharpen your speaking skills and make the winning case. Mehdi Hasan is an award-winning British-American journalist. He will, right? And he is the host of the Mehdi Hasan Show on MSNBC and NBC's streaming channel Peacock. Hasan is a former columnist and podcaster at The Intercept and a former presenter on Al Jazeera English, and his op-eds have also appeared in the New York Times and the Washington Post. Hasan will be in conversation this evening with Jen Psaki, who has been called one of the best press secretaries. I'm going to restart because this deserves its own one. One of the best press secretaries ever. A fitting accolade. Yes. A fitting accolade given that her tenure as the White House press secretary covered one of the most complex periods in modern presidential history. Psaki has a show launching on MSNBC in 2 weeks, Inside with Jen Psaki at 12 p.m. on Sundays. So please welcome me in joining to Politics and Prose this evening, Mehdi Hasan and Jen Psaki.
Thank you. What a great crowd. Is this working? Okay. What a great crowd here. This is amazing. Well, first I want to start by just giving you a little heads up that when we get to the Q&A portion, you will all have the opportunity to debate Mehdi, should you choose. So people here who know him know there's some safe topics where he'll be on the other side. He's a cheese lover. If you hate cheese, get on up there. Or if you are somebody who thinks COVID restrictions should have been thrown out a year ago, he's also happy to debate you. So just a heads up for that. I will note that while you're thinking about this, I have a blurb on the back where I refer to Mehdi as one of the toughest interviews I did in the White House. So just prepare yourself, make some notes, and you'll have your time. So I want to start because everybody in here may own the book, or maybe they're potential book buyers and book buyers for their friends. Yeah. Why do you need to know how to win a debate? What is the goal?
It's a great question. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. I never realized how popular you were, Jen Psaki, till I saw this crowd. And I was like, I picked the right person to be in conversation with. Special thanks to everyone standing up. I came to Politics and Prose last year for my friend Rabia Chowdhury's book launch, and I had to stand up the whole time, and I was really annoyed. So thank you all for coming and standing up. We appreciate you. Look, I say in the introduction to the book, people try and say, oh, I don't like arguing. Our mutual colleague Lawrence O'Donnell interviewed me on Monday night and said, I don't like arguing. And a lot of people say, we try and avoid them. And I quote
They're missing out.
I quote Dale Carnegie in the book saying, avoid arguments like you'd avoid rattlesnakes. I think most people actually do enjoy arguments. They enjoy winning them. The problem is they don't always win them. And if you lose an argument, obviously you're not going to enjoy doing it. So I am of the school of thought that believes that everyone wants to win an argument. Everyone at some point in their life needs to or has to win an argument, and that everyone can be taught to win an argument. And that's why I set out to write the book, because I believe very strongly that it's, people say, oh, you know, what you do or what I do, we're born that way. It's a natural. No, I don't buy that at all. I think what we do can be taught, can be learned. I've learned it over the years. People have been talking about stuff for thousands of years, going back to Aristotle. And I just wanted to combine what was already out there with my own experiences and say to people, don't be afraid of this stuff. Anyone can do this. And that's why I wrote the book.
I love that you said that, and you and I have talked about this, that sometimes people think you just like, we all came out of the womb ready to like debate people, and there's a huge amount of preparation that goes into it. It's almost the most important part. You talk a lot about this in your book. So I have a show launching in 2 weeks, just again, tell us a little bit about your preparation for winning an argument or an interview, which sometimes is an argument on your show.
So the book is divided into 3 sections. The first section is all about the fundamentals. It's all the stuff I'm talking about, the stuff you need to know about how to make emotional appeals, what you need to do with facts, what I call your receipts, which you know all about, and what you need to do in terms of listening, because listening is important also. Ad hominem arguments, which I mount a controversial defense for.
Give us a little more for people who haven't read the book. What is an ad hominem argument?
Ad hominem argument is attacking the person, not the argument. When you're in high school debate, and my daughter's in high school debate, you are taught play the bull, not the man. And that's great in theory, great on college campuses. In real life, we all know you have to play the man and the ball, right? That is just, and I make the point because one of the main ways you win an argument is by asserting your credibility and diminishing your opponents. Aristotle called it ethos, one of the 3 pillars of an argument. And therefore, when people say, well, you should just leave the person alone, just address the argument, that's nonsense. And I give examples in the book. If somebody has a history of lying, you should point that out. You don't trust that person. That's an ad hominem argument. If somebody is paid by the fossil fuel industry to deny climate change, you should point that out, that there's a conflict of interest there, and so on. So in the first third of the book, I point out all these kind of fundamentals. In the middle third, I have fun. It's the spicier section, some trips.
Don't
tricks,
skip to the middle. The beginning is good too.
Tricks, techniques, things to get you out of a hole, things to kind of corner or knock off your adversary off balance. And then the third section is what I call, what some people might call, WBD. It's kind of worthy but dull. It's practice, preparation, how to build confidence. You're like, oh, that stuff. Oh, that sounds like homework. There's actually a chapter on homework. But it's probably the most important third of the book, because I couldn't do what I do and you wouldn't be able to do what you do unless you put in those hours and that effort. Because, as I say, this is not natural stuff. This is stuff that requires preparation, delivery. And I tell the story of many people in the book who we consider today to be great orators who didn't start out that way, whether it was Winston Churchill, whether it was, I talk about Demosthenes. Those of you who studied the ancient period, Demosthenes was the greatest orator of ancient Greece. He's considered by some to be the father of rhetoric. Demosthenes could not give a speech in his 20s. He embarrassed himself in public in court. He had a stutter and a stammer. He was short of breath. He built himself an underground Batman-style cave, which he retreated into. He even shaved off half his head, so he would be too embarrassed to come out of the cave. So he forced himself to stay down there, standing in front of a mirror, running back and forth, with pebbles in his mouth to get past his stammer, until he thought he was good enough to go out and take people on again. And today he's considered one of the great fathers of rhetoric. So I'd say, if he can do it, if Churchill could do it, if MLK can do it.
And where did Churchill practice?
Churchill, there's a story about his valet, Norman, who used to hear Churchill murmuring in the bathroom, in the tub, and he would run and say, "Sir, what can I get you?" And he would say, "Norman, I'm not talking to you. I'm addressing the House of Commons." Churchill would practice his speeches in the tub, because Churchill, I tell the story in the book, when he was a younger MP, tried to give a speech in the Commons, lost his place, went red-faced. I'm sure many of us have been there, just couldn't remember what was the next thing they wanted to say. And he got, if you watch the House of Commons, it's not like the House of Representatives. It's much more furious, Prime Minister's questions.
A little spicier.
A little spicier, belligerent, and he got heckled down. He was so embarrassed. He said, "That will never happen to me again." So he spent the next 20, 30 years becoming the guy we now remember, fight them on the beaches, stand up to the Nazis. That didn't come naturally to him.
So give us a little sense of each stage. So you have a big interview coming up this Sunday. Maybe you do. I don't know what it is. You could tell us all here. What are you doing to prepare for that starting tomorrow?
So the number one thing I do when I have an interview guest, and I encourage, and this doesn't just apply to interviews, this applies to, you have a big meeting in the boardroom tomorrow. You have a big case in court if you're a lawyer. You have a big presentation in high school. I try and find out it sounds obvious. I know it sounds like the Department of Bleeding Obvious. Try and find out everything there is you could possibly find out about the issue, the other person, every argument. I talk about in the book a technique called steel manning. We always talk about straw manning, using the weakest possible argument against your opponent, misrepresenting your opponent's argument in a weak way. Don't do that. I mean, you could do that during a debate to mock them, but when you're preparing for a debate, steel man the argument. Come up with the strongest possible argument on the other side that you're going to come up against. I always try and pride myself in knowing the other side's argument better than they do. If you can know the other person's argument better than they do, then they've got really nowhere else to go, and there's no surprises. You don't want to be surprised in a live event, on live TV, in the middle of a boardroom presentation. So people, again, take this stuff for granted, but it requires a lot of time. I talk about in the book about role-playing. When I was at Jazeera English, when we spent a long time on interviews, longer than we have in cable news, as you'll discover in a couple of weeks. We would actually sit and role play. So we had the former Israeli foreign minister on the show, Danny Ayalon. I had a producer basically become Danny Ayalon for a week. And she would come into meetings and she would be Danny Ayalon. And I would treat her as Danny Ayalon. And she would, basically her job was to go through all of his previous interviews and know what his answers are to various questions. It was almost like a chart. If he says this, I'll say this. If he says this, I'll go there. So that you're complete, the whole thing is mapped out before. People are like, oh, look at Mehdi just winging it. How did he pull that? I wish I could take credit and say I just pulled it out from my memory. No, it's all planned out. Like I'm calling her Danny even after the show's over because I got so into it. But, the role playing, brainstorming, steel manning. I talk about all these techniques to get ready for that big event. Do the homework, put in the time, because it really annoys me as someone who does this for a living that people go out there and think, well, if I'm going to operate on a patient, or if I'm going to do somebody's tax plans, I'm an accountant, I'm going to do all the work for, I'm going to go to the poshest universities, I'm going to get the best degrees. Public speaking, oh yeah, I can just do that in half an hour. No, put the same amount of effort in. It's just as hard, if not harder.
So you've done all the prep work, which is the whole point. You get to the interview. What's it like in the moment when you've prepared for this moment and the person says something and you're like, I have the receipt in my back pocket and I'm so excited about this moment? Or describe it for me.
But I love the way you're describing it as if you don't know that moment, because I'm pretty sure I saw you do that in the White House briefing room with Fox's Pete Ducey a fair few times.
There you go.
The great Nepo baby of the White House press corps. I saw the Psaki bombs, but I enjoy doing
many bombs online.
So
we've seen too.
I do enjoy doing them. I do. I talk about it in the book. I'm not going to pretend. This book, I'll be honest with you, there's no false modesty in this book. I'm sorry to say to you, if you're going to buy this, but I make it very clear in the book, like there's 100 books in this store, I'm sure, that will teach you how to negotiate and give a speech and, do a presentation. I'm not doing that. I'm teaching you how to win. And I'm very ruthless about that, and I'm very open about that. And I say in the book, I get a lot of, there is a high. There's adrenaline. When I'm interviewing John Bolton, and John Bolton says, and I say to John Bolton, because I did the homework, I went back and found his oldest speeches. I find him giving a speech to the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, the MEK, which is a kind of nutso Iranian cult opposition group, which people think is good because it's against the Iranian government, so we should support that group, but they're nuts. And he's gone and given speeches for money, paid speeches. So I asked him, no one ever asked him about this. So I said, okay, let's ask him about this. So I ask him, and John Bolton, we're having the interview, and I say, what about the MEK? You claim to be for Iranian freedom, but is it because they pay you 10 grand a speech or whatever it is? How dare you suggest that I do that? No one buys John Bolton, but they did pay you for your speeches when they were a proscribed terrorist organization. He says, no, Hillary Clinton, who I'm sure you love, she delisted them. I'm like, yeah, but you gave a speech to them before they were delisted in Paris. In 2000, whatever it was. I have the date. I have the YouTube. I went and watched it. We transcribed it. John Bolton, we're on remote. John Bolton's like,
up.
No, John Bolton does you said this interview would be 15 minutes. And your 15 minutes are up, sir. And I'm like, actually, no, I've got a clock in front of me. We're not at that time. And that is a great moment to know that John Bolton is, is nobody's fault. Whatever you think about John Bolton, smart guy. He's been debating since the Yale Political Union. He's actually very good at interviews. Most interviews don't get the better. That's a great moment to go, okay, I have the receipt. He thinks he's out of here, but he's not out of here. So those moments are great moments. I talk about it in the book, you know gotcha questions. As a former press, I'm sure you've accused others of using gotcha questions. It's a classic move from politicians. Oh, that's a gotcha question. Nothing wrong with a gotcha question. That's good. I'm trying to get you. I'm holding you to account, right? I love the way people run away. Yeah, I'm trying to get you. I make no apologies for that, right? Holding someone to account, catching them out. Fine, if you're inconsistent, if you're dishonest, I'm going to call you out. General Michael Flynn. Before he went kind of full QAnon-esque and had the shortest national security advisor career in American history, he came on my show. He was still a Trump proxy at that time in the 2016 race. And we had discovered that during the Obama administration, when were you in the Obama administration? Till the end. So in the end of the Obama, he was the head of the DIA, Defense Intelligence, perhaps Barack Obama's worst decision, many decisions, but he made Michael Flynn head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Flynn went in front of Congress, and we found a quote from a transcript where he talked about how Iran's nuclear program wasn't a threat, or some such formulation. So I decided to read those words out to him. I talk about it in the book. A way to kind of disarm your opponent is present them with their own words without telling them they're their words. People think that's below the belt. Why is it below the belt? It's your words. It's not my job to remember that they're your words. It's your job. So we read out the quote. I said, well, he spent the whole show saying, Iran, we must, but, hawkish position. I said, do you agree with people who say that Iran's nuclear program is not... No, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. But those are your words. Those are moments. Some people, they go cheer at football games. That's me. That's my moment. Yes. That's my moment. I say the receipts. And I have a chapter on chapter 3 of the book is all about the receipts. So always make sure you have your receipts. Don't get into any debate, argument, discussion where you are not armed with receipts. And sometimes physical receipts. The whole phrase receipts, Whitney Houston's line about receipts, comes from actually wanting to see physical receipts. Sometimes it's great to have a document. You've done that. Again, in the briefing room, you've pulled out. I've got it here.
I had this in my pocket. I just happened
accidentally.
to.
Just accidentally. You
there
didn't know.
You are. So one of the things you talk about in the book, which really stuck with me, is just this: where do you balance between facts and charts and heart and emotion? I mean, and Democrats, God bless all of them in the umbrella, love a good chart. And love data. I mean, I don't know if you all remember the bending the cost curve stage of the Affordable Care Act. That was the argument. I was in the White House at the time. I still don't know what that means.
Did you stay awake during the meetings? Were you snoozing in the corner?
But, there is a balance, right?
Yes.
Because you want to be fact-based and have the receipts, but you also want to be flexible and agile. So what's that balance, or how would you define that for
people? So the balance is you need facts. I'm not Kellyanne Conway. I'm not here to tell you that. We're in a post-fact, alternative fact world. In fact, one of the reasons I wrote the book is because we might come to this is like there are so many people gaslighting us these days and BSing us and have ruined the art of the debate just by kind of beating the crap out of us with nonsense that you can't even have a good faith argument anymore. But in terms of the people who do want to have a good faith disagreement, I say, look, facts are really important. You need to have a solid, substantive backing to what you're saying. But that is not what's going to win you the argument. Nobody's ever convinced with a chart and Democrats, bless them, the Labour Party in the UK where I'm from, it's the same thing, very technocratic approach. If I can do one more Pew poll data point, I will convince this voter. If I can, if I could,
think tank could write a report.
If I had just one more fact, one more statistic, and Hillary Clinton, bless her heart, in 2016, she's up against Donald Trump. Donald Trump understands, whatever you think about Donald Trump, he understands how to rouse people emotionally with all the worst emotions, but he knows how to rouse people emotionally. Build a wall. Lock her up, ban Muslims. We remember those lines today because they're to the point and they rouse something in you, either kind of disliking or like. Hillary Clinton has a 17-point childcare plan. I'm sure it was great. I'm sure it would have improved childcare across America. But nobody was going to vote on that basis. No one was paying attention, sadly. I wish we lived in a world where the person with the 17-point childcare plan wins. But that's not the world we live in. Again, I say in the book, live in the world as it is, not the kind of abstract high school, college debate system. That's great for if you're a high school, college debater, great. But in the real world, it's not how it works. You have to have an emotional appeal. You have to be able to tell stories, engage people with passion. If it's going to be heart versus head, the heart is going to beat the head 9 times out of 10. And again, goes back to Aristotle. Aristotle talks about logos, reason. He talks about ethos, your personal credibility. But he talks about pathos. He talks about the need to connect with people's hearts. The human brain is not hardwired to receive a bunch of statistics. That's not how you convince your spouse or your kids to get anything done. You make an emotional appeal. But when we get into public policy and politics, sometimes we just think, I think Democrats in particular, because I don't know, liberal arts education, law degrees, no idea. But it's this idea of, we're like, rational. We will rationally defeat you in this Socratic method. And unfortunately, that's not how Americans are or most people around the world are. They want to be inspired, enthused. They want to see righteous anger. I talk in the book about Michael Dukakis as a kind of case study. You remember 1988?
Yeah, there's a bunch of good debate. Well, you talk about them in the book. A bunch of good debate examples where they prepped for weeks, probably, and they just sort of...
Yeah, I mean,
the moment.
I give a lot of examples of the book, not just from my own career, but of, American presidential debates, ancient Greece, good practice and bad practice. And bad practice, 1988, Michael Dukakis is up against George Bush Sr. The debate begins in L.A., Bernard Shaw, CNN, first question, because Michael Dukakis is anti the death penalty. He's getting hit hard as being soft on crime. Those of you old enough to remember, I won't see which ones of you I think are old enough to remember. And Dukakis is asked, what would you do if Kitty Dukakis, his wife, was raped and murdered? Would you still not support the death penalty? Dukakis gives a 3-minute answer. I transcribe it in the book. If you have the audiobook, you can listen to the clip. 3-minute answer where he talks about Massachusetts crime rates. He talks about DEA law enforcement. He talks about planning a drug summit for the Southern Hemisphere. He talks about everything except the fact that the guy just said his wife might have been brutally murdered. People want to hear from their commander-in-chief. What is his reaction? his gut reaction to somebody saying his wife has been brutally murdered. And he didn't do it. He was cold, he was emotionless, he was flat, and he absolutely got destroyed. His own campaign manager said, I knew we had lost that night. And that is a problem. The Democrats do that far too often. And interestingly, Hillary Clinton, someone else who was accused of being cold, etc., some of that was misogynistic, some of that was true. But you remember that she beat Barack Obama in New Hampshire shortly after what? After kind of crying. And people saying, wow, she engaged with voters at I think it was a restaurant. And I don't think that was a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence that of the 6 Democrats in presidential elections in the 21st century, the 3 who lost were Al Gore, John Kerry, and Hillary Clinton. I don't think that's a coincidence. All great people, smart people, not the most inspiring of orators. And then you have Barack Obama in a different league. And Joe Biden, who, bless him, is not the greatest of orators, but he's authentic. People think when he speaks, he's saying what he means. He's not talking off talking points or a teleprompter. So I do think that, I know correlation is not causation, but I do think that there is a link there when it comes to the emotional appeal.
So how do you think the art of winning an argument or a debate has changed since Trump came on the political scene?
It's awful. I mean, I say this as someone who loves doing this, who enjoys having people on my show. People think, oh, you just want to, you're about to launch a show, right? You want to have a bunch of interesting, eclectic, diverse guests. That's what we want to do. I love having different voices. I hate soggy consensus. I hate having discussions where everyone agrees, right? That's not how I was raised. I talk about it in the book. I come from a very disputatious household. It explains a lot, I know. So I love having people who are going to push back against me, disagree with me, and then have that good faith. I can't really do that anymore, because I want to have conservatives on the show. The only conservatives you're going to get are kind of the never-Trumpers that you see on MSNBC already. You're not, because I have a hygiene rule that I don't want to have election deniers on the show. I don't want to have climate change deniers on the show, because I'm up for arguing, but I'm not going to argue with people who don't accept reality. That's a point. There's no point arguing in that sense. So, but it limits me, right? I'm limited, and I don't know how long I can stick to that rule as we approach 2024, because if the entire modern Republican Party is now election deniers, does that mean we say we have no one from that party on the show? That's a hard choice to make as a journalist in a two-party system. It's a real dilemma, which we struggle with, my team and I, every day. But, you know, they have ruined, to go back to your question, these people, a lot of these people come on TV and they try and steamroll you, and I do a chapter in the book on it. It's called Beware the Gish Galloper. And I talk about this technique called the Gish Gallop, if you can call it a technique. And it comes from an evolutionist called creationist called Dwayne Gish, who used to debate evolutionists. I don't know if any of you have been on YouTube and watched kind of the number of debates that are out there on evolution, fact or fiction, between a creationist and an evolutionary body. And the scientist always loses, because the scientist turns up and does, hey, I've got one more statistic.
I have 20 charts.
I have a peer-reviewed study. And the other person is inspiring and funny and telling anecdotes. And Gish was a master of this. He was very engaging, very funny. And he would absolutely bombard whoever he was up against, relentless chain of cherry-pick statistics, quotes out of context, misrepresented studies, but he would throw so many in such a fast space of time that the scientist couldn't respond to all of them. And the neutral third party in the audience might say, well, I mean, the scientist is not responding to all of them. Maybe there's some truth in what he's saying. And that's the whole point of that technique. And Donald Trump has mastered the Gish Gallop, maybe knowingly or unknowingly, has mastered the idea that you get overwhelmed with BS. Steve Bannon famously said, our opponents are not the media, are not the Democrats, they're the media. And the way to deal with the media is to flood the zone with shit. And that is what they've done. They've flooded it with excrement.
Because for a while it was, let's fact check everything he said. There was a debate about whether we should, he was going to be shown, whether his tweets should be shown.
But you can't fact check. That's the problem. You see Daniel Dale, who we both know, who's now the CNN fact checker, probably the best fact checker in America. Like, there's a moment in 2020 when he comes on Don Lemon's show, and I talk about it in the book, and he just runs out of breath because he does 2 minutes of, and this was false, and this was false, and this was false. But you can't do that every day. And if you remember the first presidential debate in 2020, which I'm sure you do, Biden versus Trump, Chris Wallace, who's a pretty good interviewer, can't control Donald Trump. Donald Trump, I talk about in the book, he goes through 2 minutes of just nonsensical claims, one after another. He tells a lie every 9 seconds in that 2 minute period. There's no scenario in which Joe Biden, Chris Wallace, the entire White House press corps could come on stage and would not be able to say, let's go through each. You just don't have the time. So I talk about that in the book. What do you do when you have these people like Giuliani and Kellyanne Conway and Donald Trump and others, and the original Dwayne Gish, who's passed away, pushing this, just overwhelming you with nonsense? I'm sure you've come across that in daily life. You've had people just completely, like, where do I begin with all the nonsense I just heard? So I talk about in the book, there's a 3-part strategy, and I love the number 3. Everything is in 3. I have a chapter on why you should always do everything in 3s. I do everything in 3s, to my friends and family's great frustration. 3 reasons, 3 ways you can stop the Gish Galloper. Number 1, you pick your battles, Jen. You don't try and rebut everything. That's a fool's errand. You pick the weakest, dumbest, most ridiculous claim, and you zero in on that and you mock the hell out of that. So that the audience says, wow, that's a load of nonsense. Surely the rest of those arguments you put are probably nonsense as well. Number two, you don't budge. In our industry, and I can say our industry.
I've been there 6 months.
That's
I'm
true.
in.
You're in. Too many interviewers, and I've said this openly, move on too quickly, and it's not always their fault. We live in a very time-poor environment. You're gonna have to go to break very soon. You know, there's always an ad break coming up. It's a lot of not enough time on cable TV, and we move on. And the gish galloper, the bullshitter, takes advantage of that because they know that they can say 10 nonsensical things, and you either will rebut one of them or you won't rebut. You'll just move on to your next question because your producer's like, come on, keep the interview moving. My position is don't budge. Less is more. Don't do 20 questions. Do 2. But make sure they answer those 2. So when I interviewed Steve Rogers in 2018, who was a Trump advisor, sadly not Captain America, for my Al Jazeera English show, sadly as a Marvel fan.
It could still happen.
My team and I decided that we're going to focus on one Trump claim, which was, at the time he was saying, U.S. Steel has announced 6 new steel mills. And they hadn't announced 6 new, not at all. They put out a statement saying we haven't announced it, but Trump knew no one's going to ask him, no one's going to fact check. He's already moved on to the next lie. So I said to his proxy, Trump didn't announce 6 steel new mills. That's false. That's a lie. Oh, no. What he meant to say was, steel is doing really well. I said, yeah, but that's not what he said. He said a very specific number. He said 6 steel mills. Where are they? U.S. Steel says there aren't any. Oh, well, manufacturing's doing so. And he just kept dodging, and I wouldn't move on. And I kept saying, but 6. Where are the 6 steel mills? He said 6. He's lying, isn't he? At one point, Steve Rogers says to me, and you can watch the clip, it's my pinned tweet. It's a bit of fun. He says, just move on. Literally, because he had never done, because he started producing me. Just move on.
Your 15 minutes are up, sir.
John Bolton style. I said, no, I'm not going to move on. And this is the third point. This is what I said. I said, because you know it's a lie, and that's what you're doing here. The third point is call it out. When someone is trying to BS you, forget about all the other arguments in the book and just say, you know what? This isn't a good faith argument. This is BS. Right? Call out the strategy. This is a gish gallop. This is nonsense. You are trying to flood the zone.
Don't say gish gallop.
Don't say gish gallop. Unless you've read the book and you're talking to someone else who's read the book, which I'm sure you have. Unless we divide up after and we will argue. But pointing out, and the Rand Corporation makes another analogy. The Rand Corporation talks about Putin. He's a master of this also. If you saw his recent speech where he rambled through everything from Ukraine to communism to transgender rights. Rand Corporation says when the Russian fire hose of falsehood is on, the fire hose of falsehood, put raincoats on the people it's aimed at. Well, your job is, if somebody is BSing everyone, is to protect the audience. You want to tell them, you want to make them aware of what's going on. So that is, I mean, look, it's not easy to go up against a gish gallop, but there's a reason why only people like Jonathan Swan have done a good job of actually interviewing Trump, and I talk about Swan's interview. But it's hard, and there's no silver bullet, but I give a kind of my attempt at a strategy for how to take on the BSer.
So we've talked a lot about kind of taking on the BSer and kind of dismantling their arguments. But part of winning an argument, as you talk about in here, is also presenting something good or positive or something that people can also bite their teeth into. This is sometimes a mistake made in politics. What's the balance, do you think, for people on that?
In terms of what positive, negative, or pro, anti?
How much is it taking apart your opponent versus presenting an alternative?
No, agree. So again, I would say context matters hugely. So it depends where you are. Are you in a formal debate in a university auditorium? Are you the evolutionist versus the creationist? Are you on cable news for a 5-minute hit? Are you in a courtroom trying to persuade a jury? Are you in a presidential debate speaking to the audience at home? I think you have to vary. I talk a lot in the book about flexibility. People kind of become very rigid. There is no one style, no right answer. You have to decide. I even talk about in the book, you have to vary your volume based on, if I was talking to if it was just you, me, and 2 other people in a room, we would be having a very different conversation to this conversation. If we were on TV right now, we might be having a different tone. So your tone, your volume, your delivery, all of that matters. And yes, substance matters too. You need to know who your audience is. Is it an audience who are kind of hostile to you? Then you need to tailor your message in that case. You need to say stuff that might appeal to them, that might surprise them, because they come with a kind of, well, Mehdi Hasan, I don't like him, that MSNBC. What are you going to say to try and kind of catch them off guard and pleasantly surprise them? If it's an audience of everyone you agree with, do you want to challenge their priors? Do you want to upset the conventional wisdom and say something provocative that makes them think? So it really depends where you are. But yes, to take your wider point, I talk about in the book, especially in the final chapter about the grand finale, is you have to leave people with something substantive that they can take away. And it doesn't have to be a fact or figure. It can be a feeling. right? There's a famous phrase in debating circles that people won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And that is so important. Sometimes you watch people give a delivery, an argument on TV, a speech, whatever it is, and it kind of dribbles off at the end. It's kind of like, oh, no, I'm done. Thank you very much for your time. Don't do that. That's madness. This is your moment. The end is the moment to really send them away with food for thought, inspired, maybe a call to arms. What should you be doing after this? So I definitely believe in more positive than negative, get people inspired. When I talk about emotion, Trump does all the negative emotions. He inspires people with kind of loathing of foreigners and anger and paranoia. Yeah, but there's light. Inspire them with light, with hope. I'm all for that. But obviously, if it's some guy or some person who's, some bad faith person or some person who's trying to kind of trick people, use the spicy sections.
Get spicy in the middle, the spicy middle. So I know your wife is here. I've never met her. Okay, we're going to call her out. Now, what you write in your book about how she actually wins arguments. For those of you who don't know Mehdi, you can see how he would win arguments here, because I was like, I've been up since 4 a.m. I need a cup of coffee just to make sure I can keep up with Mehdi. So, but your wife wins arguments. So how does she win arguments? What's her tactics?
Well, first of all, she's much smarter than me, so brain power matters, intellect matters. But I would say, look, I'll say one thing here. Let me use my wife's example to make a wider point. A lot of people have been snarking about the title of the book, right? Preet last night in New York made this point about, should you win? A lot of people on Twitter and other places like, philosophy, should you win every argument? Isn't that bad? Who said yes? You're my friend.
Yeah.
Shouldn't that bad? Debating is about learning and interactions, and you should be getting stuff back. Great. I'm at the point of the book. I'm not telling you to go out and necessarily win every argument. I'm saying here's how you can win every argument, should you choose to. Just as if I'd written a book called Drive Every Car, I'm not telling you to go out, buy every car in the world and drive it. I'm saying here's how you could if you wanted to. So the example I give my wife is, maybe you might be able to beat your spouse in an argument. I'm saying just don't.
Oh.
Maybe just avoid it.
That's a little bit like he's saying he throws the game sometimes. I'm not sure about that, but
to quote a famous White House press secretary, I couldn't possibly comment. I'll come back to you on that.
I'll come back. So we're going to get to your questions in a moment, and per the instructions at the beginning, if you would like to ask a question, if you'd like to debate, if you hate cheese, if you hate COVID restrictions or anything else, you can just line up right here. Marvel movies.
Should Joe Biden run for office again? We can get Jen's take.
Yes. Everyone's too old. So I don't think that. I'm just making fun of it. Okay. You can line up at this. Don't be shy, but line up here, and Mehdi's going to take your questions. But as you're doing that, I have a little rapid fire. So line up, people. Okay. Who's the best debater today?
Do you mean in politics?
Take it wherever you want to take it, Mehdi. It's your book.
So because it's my book, I'm going to plug the book. In the book, I talk about Elizabeth Warren and how she turned up to Las Vegas. And I'll say this about Elizabeth Warren. Whatever you think about Warren, you might think she's too left, you might think she don't like, whatever it is. One thing I'm hoping we can all in this room agree, that no matter what she does between now and the day she meets her maker, is that she saved the world from Michael Bloomberg in one 60-second. She destroyed Michael Bloomberg's ridiculous presidential candidacy in 59 seconds. I talk about it in the book. She turns up in Vegas, first answer, she goes for a billionaire who calls women pigs. No, I'm not talking about Trump. It's genius. Her team were hugging chairs in the green room and jumping up and down. Wikipedia that night changed Bloomberg's page to say killed on stage in Las Vegas by Elizabeth Warren. So I would say, as politicians go, Warren, who was a high school debate champion and went to university on a debate scholarship, is certainly up there.
You know what else she did? I mean, she had lots of plans, maybe more than Hillary Clinton. I don't know. They could have a plan off or something. But they messaged she has a plan for that, which you would just meet people at events. And I went to a bunch of the early states, and people would be like, well, I'm for her because she has a plan for everything. And it's like, have you read the plans? No, but she has a plan for all of it. I'm like, that's amazing.
Which is funny because 4 years later, nearly, or 3 years later, Will Summers of the Daily Beast has a book out this week called The Plan. It's all about QAnon, because QAnon people are obsessed with the plan. So the plan has unfortunately taken a whole different meaning these days.
It's taken on a bad turn. We got to take it back. Okay, who would you love to debate? This maybe could be someone on your show, could be a debate at an event.
Someone I've always wanted to interview and really grill and go at it back and forth, because I both loathe them and respect them as intellectually.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Is
Tony Blair is someone This month is the 20th anniversary of the Iraq invasion, which Blair and Bush happily gave the world. And George Bush, I always think George Bush would be a kind of pointless interview. I mean, no disrespect, but like shooting fish in a barrel. Tony Blair is a very smart guy, and I've watched him be interviewed on Iraq for 2 decades, and no one really lands a blow. He's the great Teflon Tony, always slips out of it, always, well, my intentions were good, well, the intelligence. And I would love to kind of go back and forth with him nowhere else to go on the Iraq invasion, on the lies that were told, on the lives that were lost, and hold that guy to account, because no one's really held him to account for 20 years.
I mean, I'd watch that. Tony Blair, if you're watching C-SPAN, if you're on Twitter, we're at Politics and Prose if you're in Washington. We're ready to do it right here. What is the issue where public opinion is most starkly different from your point of view?
Oh, that's a good question. Because on most issues, I have the people. No. I guess right now, a contentious one is I support defunding police brutality in this country. And unfortunately, the polls of the American public are not there yet. And it's a tough choice. And people in your party, as you know, in the Democratic Party and the administration you were part of, run away from this argument because they don't
Or they just don't think that you should defund the police. But
Or they do, but they don't want to say it because it's political suicide, they think.
Or they're worried about crime in their communities. Go on. Go on.
Or I didn't say anything about crime. I said defunding police brutality, which surely you agree with.
Well, defunding police departments,
But I
which
said
is what we're
defunding
actually
police
talking about. Well,
brutality.
then you change the meaning of this term.
Which is the whole point of the book.
You're a gish
Define
galloper.
your terms. No, I'm not a gish galloper because I'm not overwhelming you with bullshit. I'm reframing the debate, which is the chapter on judo moves, which is when you're making a case, define it on your terms. Liberals and leftists for far too long fight arguments on the terrain of conservatives, and I think that's mad. Define it as you want. For example, I say in the book, when I talk about making a case, the police argument is a very hard argument to win. But don't talk about it in terms of, police crime rates, police levels, etc. Talk about it in purely emotional terms. Tell me which American supports funding the beating of Tyree Nichols. Find me an American who says, yes, I support funding that. That's my argument. Show me that person.
Okay. All right. I think we're ready for some questions. Go ahead.
Okay. I would like to know which debate you lost.
Oh.
And why, and to who.
So we'll stay away from personal household debates. So I did a debate on. There was a couple, so I'm just going to think which one's the more interesting one. I'm thinking. Well, a couple of things. One is I did a debate with a climate change denier years ago. I would never have climate change deniers on my show now, but then I was cocky 10 years ago. I could do a climate change denier, and it was just pure gish gallop. It was a disaster. Like, it was just nonsense, one after another. It's conspiracy theories. You question this, that's part of the conspiracy. You cite this study, well, they're all in on it. It didn't go anywhere, and I was embarrassed that I'd used up an hour of airtime on my show to platform a conspiracy theory. So that's the kind of ones I would say avoid. And if I wrote another book, one chapter not in this book is when to walk away from an argument, when not to have the argument. But an actual proper debate that I lost, I did a debate for Intelligence Squared, which is a debating organization in the UK and the US, on Angela Merkel years ago. During the height of the Euro crisis, when Greece was really suffering. And it was about how is Angela Merkel destroying Europe, and I was making the case that she was. And it was at Intelligence Squared, and it's another reminder that you have to know your audience. I turn up at this debate, and I'm pushing kind of, Paul Krugman and lefty themes about Keynesian spending and why it's austerity is destroying Europe. The entire crowd have paid £70 for a ticket or whatever it is. Even the Greeks in the crowd are kind of like Greek shipping tycoons who are like, yes, we need to destroy our country. And I was like, this is not going anywhere. Like from 20 minutes.
I'm not winning.
20 minutes in, I was like, this audience, maybe I could win this debate somewhere else. But in this hall tonight with these people, I got no chance. So it is very important. The very first chapter of the book is called Know Your Audience. Like, nothing is more important than to understand who your audience are, what they want to get out of something, what you can offer that audience, how you can identify with them. Because if you nail that, everything else is easy.
There you go. Tip number 1. You can skip the first chapter. Just kidding. Go ahead.
All right. Which politician do you appreciate the most as far as their debating skills?
I mentioned Elizabeth Warren already. I mentioned Tony Blair already. Let's pick someone else. I actually think... So if you take debating skills, interesting, you didn't say interviewing skills. I would say Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, if you watch her on the House floor, separate to TV interviews. If you've seen some of her performance on the House floor, it is, to use the kids' memes, she does bring the fire. It is really, really passionate, and I love passion. The thing I hate most about politicians on the liberal left is when they are technocratic and bureaucratic and managerial. And if you've seen some of her recent speeches, including her speech, if you want to YouTube it, her speech on the day Republicans voted to remove Ilhan Omar from the Foreign Affairs Committee was a stunning piece of oratory. And you watch it and you feel something. That for me is how you, as I say, that's the emotional appeal. That's going to beat any kind of technical argument about, well, you didn't remove Matt Gaetz or you didn't know that. What she came up with in terms of bigotry and standing together with marginalized communities was a very powerful and kind of got your skin on edge.
That's a good one. You've given everyone homework. It's good. It's good. Okay, more homework to come.
List.
Go ahead.
Yeah, watching YouTube. That's what I do in my spare
Hey,
time.
Mehdi. So, first of all, I've been a fan of yours for a while, so it's an honor for me to be here.
Thank you very much.
And so, one pattern I've noticed across your career is you, on several occasions, you interviewed Noam Chomsky, who's a legendary professor, and on multiple occasions, you've referenced his most famous book, Manufacturing Consent, on how the media likes to manufacture consent for an uninformed American public to get them to, vote for candidates who are, I guess, only serve the interests of the elite. So, across your career, your records have been very clear. You're a staunch critic of Israel. You're a staunch critic of human rights.
I wonder where this question is going. I'm guessing in my head.
Okay, I'll go on. Quick. I'll make it quick.
He's done his homework.
You're a staunch critic of Saudi Arabia and the human rights violation. You criticize U.S. military campaign
have the best positions
in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and others. So my question for you is, how does an anti-establishment figure like you work for a corporate establishment media such as MSNBC?
So let me ask you this: why are you walking away? Do you not want to
brought
know
the
answer?
fire.
That's a weird. Was that a question or a speech?
No, it was a question because.
But normally when you ask a question, you wait to hear the answer. So, and actually, okay, let's do it this way. Let me ask you back. How do I work for them? You tell me, how do I work for them?
Well, you're a broadcaster on NBC, which is owned by Comcast. It's one of the largest telecommunications.
But of all the
companies in
issues
world.
you just mentioned, which ones have I stopped talking about since I went to work for MSNBC?
Wait, can you repeat the question?
You listen. Happily, I'm good at repeating questions. You listed a bunch of issues that you said I'd done over my career, and then you said, and now you work for MSNBC. I'm saying of all the issues you mentioned, Israel, Saudi Arabia, U.S. militarism, Libya, etc., which ones have I stopped talking about or stopped railing against since I joined MSNBC in August of 2020?
No. Well, for example, last year when the issue between Israel and Gaza was happening, you had one of the, I think it was a deputy ambassador or something like that, of Israel, and you've had him on, and he just couldn't shut up about Hamas and stuff like that. So that very clearly says, and at the end of the debate, you asked him, do you support a two-state solution? And he didn't really give you a direct answer on that. Well, that's an example. So
That's a good example, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. I love that. There you go, ending in agreement. So my position is I have the same criticism of the corporate media I've always had. I have the opportunity to work for corporate media. It's a great blessing and opportunity because I get to address millions of people on platforms that I normally wouldn't have access to. For example, I was on air in primetime at MSNBC doing All In the week that Joe Biden made one of his best decisions but most criticized decisions was to end the war in Afghanistan in August 2021. And I was able to get more Afghan voices on TV that week than probably any cable show or any cable channel has ever done in the space of 5 days. So for me, I have all my criticisms. I know about all the constraints. But my position is, hey, as long as they let me do what I'm doing, I'll keep doing it. And when they stop letting me do what I do, I'll stop doing it. I hope that's all right.
Thank you for your question. Okay.
Hi. So you mentioned the Jonathan Swan interview, which brought back lots of great memories for me.
That's another piece of homework. It's very good.
Please, everyone should look that up.
It's in the audiobook, but you can also watch it on HBO.
So I think that's a really great example of someone like using the tactics that you mentioned to really turn the tables on a Gish Galloper?
Yes.
Gish Galloper. So well so that, if I remember correctly, former President Trump was actually the one holding up the graphs.
Yes.
Right? He was pulling out his folders and holding up graphs, and some great memes came out of that as well. What learnings can modern journalists and hosts take away from that interview when they are choosing to interview more these gish gallopers and election deniers and so on and so forth?
It's a great question, and I actually used Jonathan's interview, and Jonathan's a good friend of mine. We've talked about that interview many times. I used that interview. Who's seen the Jonathan Swan Donald Trump interview? Yeah, good. A lot of people have seen it with the famous Jonathan.
You've at least seen the memes.
The memes. Everyone's seen the memes. And he won an Emmy for it, which he deserved. He did the 3-part process, which I mentioned. He picked his battle. He said, let's talk about death numbers. Let's talk about the statistics, case fatalities. He didn't budge when Trump brought out the graphs. Trump's like, look at South Korea. And most interviewers would be like, screw South Korea, I've got another question to ask. Yeah. Jonathan goes, okay, let's look at South Korea. And now Trump thinking, shit, South Korea, what do I do? Because normally Trump's used to like, next. Trump doesn't know South Korea. He's like, who's the president of South Korea? By the way, why did interviewers never ask Trump just fact questions? People always say, what would you ask Trump? I always think, just fact questions. Mr. President, what does NATO stand for? What is the WHO? I mean, when are you heading for Wakanda? Those are the questions I would ask in the White House briefing room to Kate if I had a chance. Anyways, but Swan did that. He picked his battle. He didn't budge when Trump threw the papers at him, and he called it out. He said, "Look, our numbers are bad. We have much worse statistics. This is what you're doing. You're just trying to railroad me." And what's interesting is, people did learn from the Swan interview. But the problem was the Swan interview was 2020. It was at the end of the Trump presidency. It wasn't until the very end that a lot of interviewers started wising up to Trump tactics, standing up to him, using words like the L word, liar, R word, racist, which too many journalists ran away from the first 3 years of presidency. And I know my good friend Wajahat Ali is here somewhere in the crowd as well, and he's made this point that like a lot of us, there were a bunch of us for years saying, hey, Trump's kind of fascist and racist and dishonest. And they're like, you can't say stuff like that. He's the president. That's extreme. You've got Trump derangement syndrome. Then now it's like, oh, January 6th, we all agree with that. So some of us were saying this stuff for a long time. Jonathan Swan did that great interview. Chris Wallace also did a great interview with Trump in 2020. But it was all at the very end. Now, the big question is, what happens now in 2024? Do you still platform him? It's a good question. And I think journalists have to think long and hard how they're going to platform him. How are the interviews going to happen? Do you do them live? Please, God, no. At least pre-tape them so you can somehow interject with facts and figures. Jonathan Karl of ABC did a very good interview with Arizona election denier. Why am I forgetting her name? Kerry Lake. Kerry, how can you forget Kerry Lake? She's still protesting the election. He did it, and he did it pre-taped for his Sunday show, and he cut away. Every time she said some nonsense, the voice of God narrator came in and said, that's not true. Actually, da-da-da. And that was great. I think we should do more of that with people who just are serial fabricators.
Yeah. Lots of tips there. Okay, who's next?
Hi, Mehdi. I've always wanted to ask you this question because I think any politician who agrees to come on your show is out of their minds, and because you are terrifying, and so you must have amazing producers that can convince people who know they're going to be destroyed to come on. Yes. Okay. But so my question is, are there people who like you are not been able to get because they're so scared to be interviewed by you? Name some names.
Yes, but I'm not going to tell you their names because we're still trying to get them on.
He still wants them.
I'm not going to be like, he's so scared of me, he won't come on. That's not really going to work in the persuasion angle. But no, look, I have great producers. Last night in New York, my MSNBC team came out. It was really fun to talk. They were watching me, and I was giving them the credit they deserve because they make me look good with all their research and prep. And I think another friend of mine is here, Lucas Radicella is there at the back. He's an Al Jazeera English producer who I worked with for years. He knows a lot of those Al Jazeera guys. They got their ears chewed off by guests. Like, there's a guy called Ryan Coles, who I mentioned in the book, who used to be here now in London. He was the guest booker. And his job was to walk people out of the studio to the street.
So awkward
Poor
sometimes.
guy. It was so awkward. Like Julia Gillard, the former Australian Prime Minister, comes on the show. She comes on to promote some initiative for girls in Africa that she's promoting for me. And I say to the team, I want to ask one question about immigration. Okay, you could just ask one immigration question at the end. My one question at the end was, how does she sleep at night with blood on her hands from all the boats that have drowned because of her policies? And we're sitting opposite each other. It's me, her, a cameraman, no one else in the room. And the interview's over. Thank you for joining me. How long are you in town for? When are you in DC till? She's just looking at me like she wants to kill me. Ryan comes in and has to do the long walk of shame with her team, who are all giving him dirty looks. Vitaly Klitschko. I talk about the Vitaly Klitschko story. He came on the show. You know Vitaly Klitschko, current mayor of Kyiv, valiantly defending a city against Russian aggressors, former heavyweight champion of the world, 6'10", has arms, the size of my entire body. And he was mayor of Kiev, and he comes on the show, and we persuaded him to come. It was very hard to get him on the show. We're still trying to get him on, actually, recently. And he came. He doesn't want to come back on the show for some reason. He came on, and I asked him. He said to me, "My English not so good. You speak slowly." Sorry, I can only do Ivan Drago. I can't do Vitaly Klitschko. And I said, all right, I speak slowly. And for the first few minutes of the interview, I was like, the British tourist on holiday. Can you show me the way to the Colosseum? And I was very slow. But then after a few minutes, I was in the heat of the moment. I went back to my normal fast-paced speech. And he was getting annoyed and I couldn't notice. And then I asked him, is he linked to the Ukrainian mafia, which was an accusation at the time. So the interview ends and he's furious because I've spoken fast and I've accused him of being a criminal. And he stands up over me, 6'10". He says, "You said you would speak slowly." And I'm thinking, is he going to hit me? And if he hits me, am I going to die? But is it going to go viral? Horrible thoughts to be having all at the same time. It's a little sick,
Very sick.
But then Ryan gets to walk him out of the room. He's Ryan's problem
Ryan
now.
is tough. Where's Ryan
Ryan's
today?
problem. Ryan is in London. He fled the country, literally.
Understandable. All right.
Hello. Can you record this if you don't post it? My friend, I forgot to ask him. A voice recording is okay too.
Video's good too. I have a bit in the book about how when you're
We
speaking,
can do
film yourself.
whatever you want. We'll
Film
count
yourself
down.
speaking.
Thank you so much. Huge fan of both of you, so thank you for looking at me direct in the eye. I feel that my heart is beginning to flutter. So let me get this
I
over
don't
with.
ask whether it's from Jen or me, but yeah.
Half and half split.
Okay.
What was that middle split?
Love it.
Thank you. So I had a question actually because my friend, another friend I invited to come, could not make it, but I'm asking this on her behalf as well because I was just having a conversation with her about this topic, and for her and I both, we feel that there are so many times when we host and possess such an expansive and variety in terms of our knowledge of topics that can be so extensive, however, not to such a degree that becomes a specialty. So perhaps this phrase known as a jack of all trades kind of thing. And we were kind of wrestling with this idea of how to argue, and I don't know if perhaps you address it in the book, but to the crowd tonight, how do you find yourself tackling an argument with someone who perhaps who can have more information on a topic that you do not find yourself to be? Masters in political science, this is kind of my life. Not that I never feel that I don't have enough information, but sometimes I'm arguing with someone who has views that perhaps I don't agree with, but because of the lack of information or research-based fact, I cannot carry on. And I want to because no one wants to lose.
I do talk about that in the book a lot.
Okay.
It's a challenge for all of us. Jen's going to have it when her show launches. I have it right now when my show launches. When I was doing a nightly, until very recently, a nightly live show, an hour a night. And my mother, bless her, was watching it on YouTube in the UK, and she's like, I don't understand how you have time for, how do you prepare for all this? I said, I have a great team. She goes, how can you be on, I know you don't know all this stuff. She's my mum. She's my mum. She wanted me to be a doctor. She knows I don't know anything about COVID. What am I doing talking about medicine and public health? And every Asian child feels that not becoming a doctor. And it's really important. I talk about in the book, there's a whole chapter on doing your homework, and there's a whole chapter on preparation. And it's so important. I talk about in the book having to interview people like Steven Pinker, for example. Steven, huge intellect, huge, 100 times smarter than me, wrong on almost everything, but smart guy, right? And I have to debate with him. He comes on my show, and we prepare as much as we can. Paul Bremer, the example I give in the book is Paul Bremer. Some of you may remember Paul Bremer. He was the viceroy that George Bush sent to run Iraq. And again,
my father's home country.
Again,
actually,
whatever you think about Paul Bremer, smart guy. And he turns up to do an interview with me, an hour and 10 long interview on Iraq and his legacy in Iraq. This guy literally ran Iraq, right? I hadn't been to Iraq for 10 years at that point, 5 years. And this is years after. So what do? My team and I, we go through everything. We read his memoir. We read other people's memoirs who were in Iraq at the same time. We read all of the US Inspector General's reports on waste of money during the Iraq occupation. We go through all that stuff. We spend days preparing to the point where I've got a stack of papers, to the point where when the interview's over and he's sweating, I'm sweating. And he leans forward, and it's a great moment. He says, nice research. He leans over, he looks at me, he goes, nice research. That is a great moment for someone like me who I define myself as a jack of all trades. I'm not a specialist on anything. I try and kind of keep interest in lots of interesting things. And that, again, the simple answer to that solution is you got to put in the work that you've got, and actually can help you. There is an advantage. There's a chapter in the book called Judo Moves, how you knock people off balance. If somebody comes thinking, I am the greatest authority on this subject, and you pull out 3 things they hadn't thought of, or 3 studies they hadn't noted, that immediately gives you an advantage in that position, and they'll have newfound respect for you, and the audience will have super respect for you.
Thanks so much. More Psaki bombs on MSNBC, please.
You got it. Thank you. All right. How much time do we have left? Just so I don't know who I'm asking. An authority. There's like a voice of God somewhere. Okay, great. Okay.
I'm too long in mine. I'm going to be very short. I'm trying
No.
to
I just want to make sure we get to as many people. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Questions, quick answers.
Yes, all right. Also a longtime admirer of both of you. Thanks for doing this. Your 60-second rants frequently go viral. You simply do not stutter.
They're so
are
good.
So effective and lethal in your arguments. I was wondering if you could take one of those 2 minutes to on the spot, whatever you want, 60 seconds. I was thinking either maybe like it's always a rant about something that's wrong in the world. So maybe like a rant for 60 seconds about something that you find positive in American politics, or 60 seconds on whatever is bothering you right at this moment.
Ooh. I'll play the role of timer. So.
All right. I'm going to say, here we go.
Ready, set, go.
I am 43 years old, and I love living in this country because I love all the people who my kids age right now. My kids are 15 and 10. I love young people in America because young people are saving democracy in America. And my evidence for that is go look at the 2018 midterms, go look at the 2020 election, go look at the 2022 midterms, every study that's been done. If you go talk to John Della Volpe at Harvard, he will tell you that young people with a crucial difference. Democrats say, oh, young people don't vote, only old people vote. No, not true. Young people turned out in major levels. If you take young voters out of the electorate, Democrats don't win the House in 2018, don't win the presidency in 2020, don't save the Senate in 2022, and therefore young people are actually inspiring us because everyone's like, young people are apathetic, they're always on TikTok, they're always doing nonsense. Actually, young people out there fighting for abortion rights, fighting for civil rights, fighting for minority rights, fighting for transgender rights, fighting for people who can't speak for themselves. And so I say, young people is what inspires me about America, because I don't care what the older generation is doing, building walls and voting for Donald Trump. It's the young people who are going to save this country and save democracy, because it needs saving.
Oh, to the second.
Thank you.
That was very good. Okay.
Hi, I'm Amanda, and I have forgotten my question after that. Just kidding. I am a communications director on the Hill, so I have worked with you before. Thank you very much, and I admire you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I work for Congresswoman Betty McCollum, so I
Mehdi
very
McCollum,
much.
who is one of the few members of Congress who truly stands up for Palestinian
Yes.
rights in this country. Stands up every day.
I'm honored to work for her and honored to have been on your broadcast before. But my question is not about that. My question is about gender. And I would just love to know, is there anything in your book, do you cover the gender politics around making a case? And I would actually love to hear from you as well, Jen, if you have any insights
another hour.
on this. Yeah.
Sadly, I don't address it head on.
Okay.
I will say one thing. There are far too few women in this book. I talk about Warren and others, especially because some of the ancient examples are all men. Like there weren't many women, unfortunately, debating with Socrates and Plato back in the day. Sadly,
At least not that were published.
or at least well said. One thing I would say is when you talk about gender, you talk about the way that certain arguments, when made by a woman, would not be taken the same way when made by a man. That's 100% true. I mentioned Hillary Clinton earlier, Elizabeth Warren herself. One thing I do say in the book is, and it may not be the answer you're looking for, but I talk about myself as, I'm not a woman obviously, but I'm a Muslim. I'm a member of a minority which comes with its own baggage. I talk in the book about having RAMF, which is resting angry Muslim face. When I'm paying attention, it looks like I'm angry. Like, literally, when the guest is talking, my producer will be like, you need to smile. It looks like you want to kill. And therefore, I have to deal with some of the baggage that comes with kind of people's stereotypes, preconceptions, angry Muslim man. And one thing I say in the book is, and again, this is not a good answer. Jen's going to have a much more inspiring and hopeful answer to end with. I say, look, you just have to deal with it. You know what? If you're trying to win the argument in that moment, you're going to have to save the point scoring, the double standards, the hypocrisy for another day. You have to be flexible, you have to be nimble, you have to adapt to your situation, and you have to use it to your favor. I've done it in my own case, for example, when I'm in front of a conservative crowd that thinks this Muslim person doesn't like the West, I will go out of my way to talk about kind of the Western canon and the Magna Carta and our glorious Constitution, because that throws them off balance. They're not expecting the Muslim dude to say that. But you're right, there is a gendered discourse, there is a minority discourse. Not everything in this book probably applies in that way. Maybe that's the sequel.
I love that.
It's such a good. Okay. Oh man. Here's what I would say, and I can only speak to my own experience with this. When I was working for President Barack Obama, I was the only female spokesperson in the press office, and I always felt, and these were many people who were my friends then, were my friends today, but I always felt like maybe I had to replicate who they were. Right? If their approaches were, I'm going to yell at reporters and I'm going to slam down the phone and then I'm going to brag about it, or I'm going to send like a F you, blah, curse-laden email, and that's going to be how I am tough. And I always thought, that doesn't feel really like me, but if I'm going to be like them and be tough in this business, I have to be like that. It probably took me turning 40 to realize I don't have to be like that. And Mehdi talks about this, as much as it's not about gender, it's about being your authentic self and your own authentic version of how to make those arguments. So to me, I would much rather not come out hot screaming expletives, but know I have the receipts in my back pocket and I'm just waiting like a bear for slaughter for somebody to walk into that. But it doesn't. But I don't have to do it with like F-bombs, right? I don't have to do it by slamming my phone. The other thing I would tell you is that my own experience was also that not all women, but a lot of women, and certainly for me, you have to believe you can do it. And there is a confidence gap, right, of thinking. I mean, when I worked for Barack Obama and I became the spokesperson traveling with him on the 2012 campaign, I was like, how am I going to do this? There's no one else advising him. It's me. And it's like Robert Gibbs, who was the first press secretary, said to me, I can't do a Southern accent, but just like play along with that. Like, you just got to act like you belong there. And at a certain point, people will believe you. And that's true. It's pretty simple. But you weren't advising a president until you were. You weren't making an argument on television until you did it. And sometimes you just have to like do a little superhero fit, pose. I don't know if anybody watches Ted Lasso in this room, but I used to. Okay, you know the scene when and then I'll wrap but you know the scene when Rebecca, who is the female owner of the soccer team, is going to go in and talk to the male soccer players, and she does this like big thing where she's like a tree. I used to do that before the briefing because it's a psychological thing where you're saying to myself, I got this, so figure out what your thing is. Find your authentic argument, doesn't have to be like other people, and then just fake it till you make it a little bit. Believe you can do it. Exactly. There you go.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I think that wraps our program. Mehdi, this book, which I read several months ago, but is phenomenal. I learned a lot in this book. There are so many key components of this book. I still don't want to go on Mehdi's show, and I did Fox News a lot. So it's amazing. Highly recommend it. I think.
You know when you came on a show with me when I was sitting in for the 11th hour, and I grilled you, and all your fans trolled me all night.
Go.
How dare you speak to Jen Psaki? Brian Williams could have so much more.
Right. Anyway, I think you're going to sign some books, right? Okay, great. Well, thank you all for coming. This is an amazing crowd and turnout.